Hello my friends and welcome. My name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's review with you the last year, what had happened, and also let's forecast what it could be in the next year, 2026. Let's go. Well, let's start from what I do regularly on my videos, reviewing the military map, and from this zoomed out perspective, let's check out what it was 1 year ago exactly. We have the calendar. It's an interactive map. I'm recording this video on December 31st, evening time, and you see what it was 1 year ago. And let's switch to today. Yes, you might see the substantial advancement of Russians, all across the front lines. Mostly eastern Ukraine, Zaporizhia, they bogged down in Vovchansk, and also if we go to Sumy Oblast, we would see that 1 year ago there was Kursk operation still in progress, and now Russians entered Sumy. Actually, that's exactly what I forecasted, that Ukraine will withdraw the forces, and after it Russia, because they accumulated their resources in Kursk region, they may try to gain control over Sumy, but this operation failed for Russians miserably, as well as this northern part of Kharkiv. Yes, recently Russia intensified the military actions in Vovchansk, but there is no perspective for them to break through closer to Kharkiv. With those two spots, or you may call them bridgeheads, Russians basically create tension for Ukraine, so Ukraine has to consolidate some of the resources and forces to protect Sumy and Kharkiv regions. And here you can see the red area. It shows the territorial gains of Russia for the last year. Here they advanced a little bit towards the northern area. Also, Sumy region we're not seeing here. Yeah, this shows that Russia definitely has the initiative. Russians are taking the ground compared to Ukraine. However, still Ukraine has some of the counteroffensive actions. Like, for example, there was the attempt of Russians to break through in Pokrovsk direction. Let's recall that one. It was here in Zoloty Kolodets. Russian broke through by 17 kilometers per 3 days. Definitely it was the successful operations, but Russians didn't plan it. It was just by chance that they were so successful. And later on, Ukraine sent fire teams, very capable forces, pushing Russians out. So speaking about the Ukrainian counterattack operations, this one was really a masterpiece, very successful. Some of the Russian troops were encircled and later on flatlined, or they surrendered to Ukraine. Also, it stopped the Russian offensive a little towards Rodinsk and Mirnograd. Without this Ukrainian move, Russians would have taken Pokrovsk and Mirnograd a long time ago. And the recent success of Ukrainian army is, of course, Kupiansk. President Zelensky filmed the video over here, this crossroad near Stella of Kupiansk, telling that Ukraine definitely performed a successful counterstrike, and many of the Russian forces are trapped in a couple of the enclaves right in the city. Supplies are being cut for Russians, so they may just dream about Kupiansk, and maybe next year they're gonna accumulate enough forces to get the city back again under control, but I have doubts about it, because Russia simply doesn't have enough troops to act elsewhere. Their main direction is now Donetsk Oblast, Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, and also Zaporizhia direction. Kupiansk, well, after all, Russia didn't put Kharkiv Oblast in their constitution as the annexed territory, so I do not expect that Russians would definitely send substantial forces to Kupiansk. I think in 2026, Ukraine may still have it under control. Also, throughout the year, Ukraine performed several of the counterattacks, like, for example, in Kamensk, Russia took Kamensk after all, but they were pushed at least 2 of the times from the settlement, and finally, because they have significant amount of everything, they moved further. But still, it's not the direct threat for Zaporizhia, even though the outskirts of the city are very close to this gray area. But Ukraine has defense lines, also natural obstacles, those lakes, and not a narrow river. So I would say that for Russians, it's even easier to go from Pokrovsk to Zaporizhia than from the south, but this will take the entire year for them to appear close to Zaporizhia, or maybe more, because most of the analytics, including me, we thought that the last winter Pokrovsk, for example, will fall, but no, Russia is still unable to establish the full control over the settlement as well as Mirnograd, even though Ukraine withdrawn the main forces from Mirnograd. But Putin wants to take the entire Donetsk Oblast, including the most fortified area, goes from Slavyansk towards Konstantinivka, and it's already understandable that if Russians wasted so many forces, and it's more than 130,000 KIA flatlined for the last year alone, those are the Russian losses, like more or less official. And this statistics is kind of conservative, it's not full. Well, just imagine how many troops Russia may waste for entire Donbass, for Kramatorsk. Those are very, very big settlements, and they go almost without any sort of the gaps from one city to other town to another city. In Konstantinivka, Russia tries to enter for such a long period of time, for several of the months already. They advanced from Toretsk, and still, you see, there is a gray area here, really far away. They try to go with tons of the convoys, infiltration attacks, but it doesn't help. Why? Well, because Ukraine in 2025 finally was capable to establish a drone kill zone. It's roughly 10 kilometers to be robust and 20 kilometers to be here and there, let's say, if we speak about the effectiveness of FPV drones. But every sort of the Russian vehicle or Russian soldier appear in the zone, it's almost 100% probability that they will not survive for a very long time. In the best case scenario, they're gonna go to some of the settlement, show the Russian flag, filmed by drone, and that's it. It is also one more feature of 2025 for Russian army, for example, because before we haven't seen so many flag operations done by Russians. And basically, that is how they occupied Kupiansk. Just small forces, one soldier, two soldiers. They went behind the Ukrainian defense. They infiltrated into the city. They were spotted by the drones waving flags. Later on, Ukrainians usually kaput them with their drones. And that's it. The local commanders shown those photos of the flags to higher commanders. Then Gerasimov got those. Oh, we took Kupiansk, and definitely this information was reported for Putin, maybe even with evidence, but it appeared to be a Russian hoax flag operation. Yes, there are some of the soldiers now in Kupiansk, some of them, not many, but they're trapped, and Russia lost Kupiansk. And if we go back to this map, where we see the Russian advancement, still Russians were not capable to break through the main Ukrainian defense lines. Ukraine is treating the ground for time, and if we believe even to Russian propaganda, how Gerasimov says that they've occupied 6,300 kilometers of Ukraine the last year or this year, because I'm filming it in 2025, it would create a rectangular of the sides of 120 kilometers and 80 kilometers. That's less than 100 miles here and less than 100 miles here. Yeah, guys, sorry, maybe this surface is not for the scale, but around like this, yeah? And for this square, Russia lost 130,000 soldiers, completely zeroed, flat-lined. And as a rule, we should multiply this number by 3 to get the exact number, which is 390,000 Russian soldiers losses for a single year. Yes, Russia gained more ground compared to 2024, roughly 30–40% more, but at the same time, they lost 2 times more soldiers this year than the previous. And again, guys, this square I showed you is if we believe official statistics of Russia, because Deep State gives us 4,300 square kilometers, way less compared to Russian official propaganda or the Russian Defense Ministry. But again, even if we would believe those figures from Russia, it is very low for the losses Russia accumulated for the last year. And it also tells us that technology matters. All of those aerial drones, the ground drones, they are becoming more effective, and in some of the spheres, Ukraine has advantage over Russia. For example, ground drones, they are very advanced for Ukrainian side. There were the stories how those boats, they evacuate Ukrainian wounded personnel, or how they keep positions with actual machine guns, Browning or whatsoever, for many of the days, for a week, and the record was 1.5 months. A real vehicle robot that was controlled by the drone operator was fighting for Ukraine. Crazy, but it's the reality of the war. And about those territories, Donbass, then Putin says that Russia doesn't care, they may reach their goal in military way. They don't really care about those peace agreements, negotiations. Well, Putin is actually bluffing because he could fight for Donbass if it continues like that. And we see how hard it is for Russia to get more territories. Well, basically, he will waste more soldiers. More, I mean, potentially hundreds of thousands more. I just want to check what main settlements Russia was capable to occupy. And I can find really the main, really big towns. Maybe Velika Novosilka, but it's something between village and the town. Kurakhove was partially occupied even in 2024 before this date. Pokrovsk and Mirnograd still not occupied, but Russia created this huge bridgehead. Toretsk, even now, the part of it is still in a gray area, and Konstantinivka is out of reach, and Russians cannot move from Chasiv Yar. They are standstill there. All of their advancement, here it's almost no advancements for Russia. They just went closer to that lake, that's it. Well, Russia recently occupied Siversk. Probably it's the biggest prey for them, and the distance before you see it wasn't that dramatic, wasn't that big, and Russia will try to advance in the future towards Sloviansk. It's already understandable. Russians also went closer to Liman, but still not occupying the settlement. Kupiansk, it was like that before, and Russia has the bridgehead in the east bank of the Osko River. Plus, they went to Sumy, occupying several of the villages. Well, Russian officials say that they managed to occupy 315 villages, or settlements, like in general towns, small villages of Ukraine. And Ukraine totally has more than 30,000 villages and cities and towns. Just imagine this number. So definitely with the present pace, they need 100 years for Ukraine to be occupied. Really, 100 years. But we understand that for Donbass, it's not going to be easy for Russia at all, because that's the fortified area. And Russia may struggle here for the next maybe 2, maybe 3 years. Depends on Russian economy as well. We're gonna speak about it too here. Because the perspectives are not bright for Russia at all, despite them having for now some turn advantage over Ukraine. But it's logical because Russia itself, it's huge, it's big. It has more production, more capabilities, more people, more everything compared to Ukraine. And yes, Ukraine has the support from our allies, but this support is still kind of low for Ukraine to stop Russia completely on the front lines. Now Ukraine may just hold on, trading the ground for the time to obtain more of the support and for Russia to grind down little by little, especially Russian economy. The 2025 was also unique for Ukraine, applying special kinetic sanctions against Russian oil refineries. It was a record number of the strikes, especially starting from August. At the beginning of the year, Ukraine hit some of the Russian facilities, but since August, those strikes definitely became absolutely massive, and Russians, well, they started to struggle with their fuel production. There was definitely the crisis in multiple of the regions of the Russian Federation, but lately they opened the new refineries which were not in operation before, behind Ural Mountains, and for that, for Ukraine, is still hard to reach. It's a very long distance. Also, Belarus is helping Russia a lot. They have the huge refinery, and for political reasons, Ukraine doesn't want to escalate hitting Belarus directly, even though, according to international law, Belarus is the ally of the aggressor country. It gave its territory back in 2022 for attack on Ukraine. It also supports Russian military. Some of the drone operation is also happening from Belarus territory, Shahid drones control. So it is the aggressor country as well, but Ukraine doesn't want to strike Belarus refinery to avoid political circumstances. And that refinery is so huge that, as I remember before the war, it was working also to sell fuel for Ukraine. And in almost every of the gas station we had this Belarus benzene. It was absolutely everywhere. That's how powerful it really is. Also, Russia cooperates with Central Asian countries also to receive fuel. So the fuel crisis for Russia is not that significant as it was in October, September, November, even in August. They struggled. Now, more or less, they went out of it, but Ukraine continued to apply sanctions on new economy spheres of Russia. Like, for example, this video was taken by the Turkish sailors in Novorossiysk port. Yeah, definitely like the Star Wars. As you might remember, it was attacked in November. Ukraine used Neptune missiles, also FP2 drones to hit Russian air defense systems, and Russia lost at least 4 of them. They are very expensive, S-400 state-of-art, the best Russian air defense, but Russia continued to lose those, even on the Russian territory far away from the Ukrainian border, and the damage to the oil infrastructure of the port was also significant. Yes, after the strike, Russia renewed the port operation, but still not fully. It requires significant maintenance, and the repair jobs might take few months for the port to establish its 100% capability or capacity to process oil. But Ukraine may attack the same place once again, because Ukraine has Neptune missiles, and some of our allies, they are working to boost Ukrainian long-range military capabilities to hit other Russian targets, applying new kinetic sanctions. The good thing here that unlike the previous White House administration, Donald Trump doesn't give a fuck about Ukrainian strikes on Russia. It seems like, at least, because before, do not escalate, the policy was by Jake Sullivan, I guess, not by Joe Biden directly, but Joe Biden listened to his national security advisor. With Donald Trump, it's like, you fight, I don't care, but we should sign peace agreement. And we see how Donald Trump, after all, he takes Russian side, forcing Ukraine to capitulate from, for example, Donbass. So I would give Donald Trump the nomination of the Idiot of the Year, because of this meeting between him and Putin in Alaska that changed absolutely nothing. Just, this picture was taken, later on shown by Donald Trump. Yeah, throughout the year I told lots of the stuff about Trump's peace efforts, and probably you understand the general idea that he is just playing for Russians, played by Russians, as better to say, with all of his advisors, Steve Witkoff, Kushner. There are many of the reasons for Trump to do it. One of the reasons is to make business with Russia as usual, and also take Russia from the Chinese hugs, to make it less dependent on Russia, more dependent on the United States, and finally to put Russia against China. That's the dream of Donald Trump, and of course it will not happen, because the ties between Russia and China, they're very close now. China is basically slaved the part of the Russian economy. They also slaved politically the Russian regime, and Russia, well, still it keeps some sort of the independence, but it's just the partial one. They cannot live without China, and if it was not China, the war in Ukraine would have finished a long time ago. And Donald Trump, with his actions, he actually brings a possible bigger war closer. And you see how the war changed, the escalation of those aerial strikes, of how many drones Russia sent to Ukraine each night, those hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, how they really hit hard Ukrainian energy infrastructure. There are lots of the blackouts. It hasn't been like that in 2024, and this year those strikes, they skyrocketed, because Russia sees that it's not getting punished on international arena. Putin is flying even towards the United States of America. He's flying to China. He has good relations with many other countries. India, by the way, this year it is already evident that it took the wrong side as well. And now Indian companies, they start to purchase more of the Russian oil. It was a few months, then they purchased a lower amount because of the sanctions. Definitely they were afraid. But now it seems like they found out a variant of how to bypass those sanctions, circumnavigate those, or maybe they understood that those sanctions mean nothing. They were just announced by Donald Trump as he signs many of the decrees that do not matter. Maybe this Treasury directive also doesn't matter on practice. And those American sanctions, I would say, they're not there to help Ukraine or something. It's about oil, it's about money. You see Donald Trump, even then he speaks about Venezuela. We need oil, it's our oil. So here you go. He just wants to sell the same oil to India. That's why he applied some sanctions. He wants to take the market because it's #1 priority for Donny, even more priority than good relations with Putin. But he might do it in parallel. For him, he is #1, the king, and Putin is some sort of the princess. But for Putin, he is a king, and Donald Trump is just a stupid idiot realtor, yeah? And here Putin is actually correct about Donald Trump, because Russia plays him left and right, and actually with forcing a victim to agree on Russian demands, Putin encourages the aggressor. And with his policy towards Europe, towards Ukraine, towards Russia, yeah, how they admire Russia and Putin, basically Trump destroyed the world order. If we speak about the organization of NATO, now it is evident, it is written in the national security policy of the United States, signed by Donny, that the United States will not help European allies. They will not put the boots on the ground. And Putin has this window to escalate this military conflict to other countries. He already mentioned that. He said that Russia should be respected to avoid more special military operations, which we may start. That's how he said. And I'm pretty much concerned about the next year and 2027. I expect more provocations from Russia. Yeah, we're gonna speak about this military escalation in this video just a little later. And here the award of the best special operation goes for Ukrainian SBU, Служба безпеки України, Ukrainian Security Service, with their spider web operation. Brilliant one, outstanding. No one has ever done something like that, but in the future probably will do. As a result of this operation, Russia lost 1/3 of entire strategic aircraft fleet. 1/3 damaged, completely demolished. It was brilliantly done. It was shared elsewhere, those videos. And how it was conducted is just pure cinema. Yeah, sadly, one of the airfields far away from Ukraine, it's called Ukrainka somehow, yeah, Ukrainian name. It's on the far east. Well, the truck that was going towards that direction, it burned down on the way. So that part failed, but the rest 4 of the main strategic airfields were hit by those drones. It was just wow, outstanding. Well, this operation was planned and executed so well that Ukraine showed the level of its intelligence services. So not just Ukraine was capable to stop the Russian army physically back in 2022, return lots of the ground, Kharkiv Oblast, Kherson Oblast. Russia was forced to leave Kiev, Chernigiv, Sumy. But also Ukraine does those very tiny, precise operations that harm Russia a lot. And actually the Russian strategic bombers were hit, so it's the part of the Russian nuclear, as they say, protection. So one more red line was crossed. Ukraine basically showed that those red lines, they do not exist. And Russia reacted more on the fake attack on Putin recently, a couple of days ago, which they made up themselves. Then they reacted on kaput of their airplanes. There was minor reaction, like almost nothing was said by Russian officials. Mostly Russian military bloggers were crying, but not Russian propaganda. They say, oh, some of the aircraft were damaged, but they will be repaired. Again, this image, yeah, for sure repaired, of course, yeah, 100%. So altogether, a spiderweb operation, together with those long-range strikes on Russian infrastructure, it actually played a crucial role this year. It forces Russian economy to struggle little by little. And in my recent video, I told about the Russian metal production decline. I told about 7%. Well, now we have new statistics. It's 10%. And without metal production, how can they build some tanks, BMPs? It goes down. And the Russian metal producing companies, they're in shock of what is happening. They have debts, they have, it's basically the stagflation. So the last year on the stream, I told you that Russian economy will decline, will start to decline in 2025. But again, as I always say, Russia has this inertia. They still have lots of the resources. So it might take lots of the time for this beast who is wounded to bleed out completely. Now it is still angry, it's unpredicted, it bites left and right, so it's this very important time for Ukraine and for our allies to unite and to survive. But from what I see, everything goes according to the proper scenario. The Russian economy declines faster actually than I thought. And the next year, it's going to be the first one for the Russian economy to go to descent. I mean, without any sort of the growth. So it's going to be very hard for Russian budget to get the money. Crisis is almost in every sphere of the Russian economy. And of course, it will finally influence the Russian military. There will be not enough money for Putin to pay for his volunteers to sign the contracts with the Russian army. So the next year, I would say, for Russia will be, or for Putin's regime, it's better to say, go, no go. So whether Russia announces a new mobilization to continue the war at the present scale or even accelerate the territorial gains with lots of the life losses, or they need to slow down and finally stand still to agree on some negotiations with Ukraine without forcing Ukraine to give up Donbass, because Ukraine will never ever agree on that. And one of the best news of the last year for me, and as for many of the Ukrainians, that our people definitely showed that their opinion matter and that they do not care who is in government. Zelensky, his party, it doesn't matter. The important thing are Ukraine and Ukrainian people. That's it. They have their own opinion, and president plus government had to follow the will of people. Yes, there was the corruption scandal. Initially, Zelensky wanted to get rid of independence of Nabu. Later on, people went on protests. They said no openly, without any sort of the fear. It was the most massive protest by the time of the war. And Zelensky, he backtracked. Also, he was pushed, by the way, by our partners in Europe, like, what are you doing? And Zelensky returned everything back. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau regained its independence, and they continued their investigation against Zelensky's circle. And we see where it led, to the Mindich Gate. Then some of the officials very, very close to Zelensky. Some of them were friends of Zelensky for many years, for decades, and they were involved in this corruption scheme. So I don't believe that Zelensky didn't know about it. Absolutely. And it seems like he appointed multiple of the people who were either incompetent or were connected to those corruption mechanisms that were used. Well, finally, Zelensky was even forced to lay off Andriy Yermak, a so-called great cardinal of the Ukrainian politics. Where is he? No one heard about him. He said something that he will join the Ukrainian army, but it was a bullshit. He's just somewhere in Ukraine. But lots of Zelensky's friends, they left because they're involved in corruption. I'm not saying that Zelensky himself is involved in corruption, but the system he organized is kind of not okay. Some of the experts even predict that there will be elections the next year and some other president may lead Ukrainian war, for example, Zaluzhny. I read some of the experts from the legacy media, but even they do not know. No one knows what is going to be the next year relative to the politics. Who would have thought that this corruption scheme and coverage is possible even 1 year ago? No one could potentially predict that. But it happened, and we'll see how deep the rabbit hole really is, because Nabu hasn't yet uncovered all of the details of the scheme. They are still investigating. And why am I saying that those news are good? Because there is the fight against corruption in Ukraine. It's not possible in Russia. I guess it's not possible now even in the United States. If Trump is involved in corruption, and it's 100%, he even pardons people with whom he might have some sort of the deals later on. It's a commercial thing now in the United States. So even there, no one may do something about it. But in Ukraine, it is possible. And those corrupt officials, they're scared. They're running away. Some of them were arrested. And it's good sign overall, because Ukraine is not about Zelensky's friends, not about the Ukrainian government. It's about Ukrainian people and our warriors who continue to fight on the front lines. And if someone takes something from them, it should be equal to treason. Yeah, now there is no death penalty in Ukraine or something like that, but it should be the substantial term in jail, in this case for corruption, during the wartime, of course. In 2025, there was also the breakthrough in Ukrainian technical production, more or less independent, like, for example, Flamingo FP5 missile that was made by the Firepoint company. That company openly sells now the stocks on market, 30% of those, and I guess United Arab Emirates are interested in purchasing the part of the company. I just wonder if it's going to be the positive investment, because recently UAE condemned the Ukrainian fake strike on Putin. So maybe they're under influence of Russia or work with Russia in some of the spheres. I'm just concerned whether some of the details of the production of those missiles could go to Russia. But overall, this is the cheapest cruise missile for the size and the capabilities, let's say. Well, it's still very big, and with the air defense systems Russians have, they may shut down this missile easily. Zelensky himself stated that 1 of 5 missiles reaches the targets. That's exactly what I was saying from almost the very beginning of Ukraine using those missiles on Russian territory. Still, it's in lack of precision, and it's simply very, very big. Ukraine also has Neptune missile, and that one, it is outstanding. Even today, Ukraine used some of the Neptunes on territory of Russia, causing blackouts in Moscow region. But overall, it's a good start, with Flamingo FP2 drones from the same company. Outstanding capabilities. Every year we see Ukraine is nailing the production and adapts to the realities of the war. Yeah, just right now, then I wanted to tell about the escalation of Russia, possible escalation against NATO. We have those breaking news published 1 hour ago. Finnish forces have boarded and seized the 132-meter-long Russian Shadow Fleet cargo vessel Fidburg moments after it destroyed 5 submarine telecommunication cables between Finland and Estonia by dragging its anchor on the seabed. So it's not the first time, as you understand, is happening. This is the prompt action done by those vessels. They're working for Russia, and the idea of Russia is to escalate, to disturb, to provoke Europe, and to show that, and to intimidate Ukrainian allies, to force them to think, oh, maybe we shouldn't help Ukraine, or maybe we shouldn't confiscate the frozen Russian assets. I would say, for me, it's personally the disappointment of the year from European side that they were not capable to confiscate Russian money. Instead, they spend their own money for Ukraine, and Ukraine will have to repay those in case Russia pays some sort of the compensation for Ukraine. Like, the scheme is strange, but Europe doesn't show unity under this huge threat. And the idea for Russia is just to scare those bureaucrats, politicians. Well, they're working well on that, I would say sometimes even successful, but still Ukraine, after all, obtained those 90 billion. So for 1 year or maybe even for 2 years, it would be close to enough for Ukraine to withstand those Russian attacks on the front lines. But we are not here speaking about complete stop of the Russian forces. With that, Ukraine requires more of the investments, and especially from the United States of America. I mean, direct military support may help Ukraine to stop Russia and force Russia for some sort of the peace negotiation, at least ceasefire. So Donald Trump was really interested in that. He would, of course, supply more weapons to Ukraine. We were very close to Tomahawks. Yes, it's not the decision-making. It's still not a Wunderwaffe, but just increases the pressure on Russia. Yeah, you see, we may supply Tomahawks missiles to Ukraine. We may also supply them Abrams tanks, F-16s, everything they need. And maybe after it, Putin will think, oh, maybe at least let's ceasefire, okay? And after all, Donald Trump may win his Nobel Peace Prize. But with the current approach, with appeasing the aggressor and rewarding the aggressor, it's no go, of course. And the escalation is already here. You might remember Poland drone attacks on Poland. Then 19 of the drones entered to the Polish airspace. 4 of them were shot down with mighty 35 even was used and something else, but the rest, 15, they landed elsewhere. Some of the drones covered almost entire territory of Poland, basically showing that NATO countries are not ready for the modern-day escalation of the war. After it, Ukrainian specialists were called to some of the NATO countries to share the experience of how to shut down Russian Shahed drones, and Ukraine nails it. Of course, we have drone interceptors, our volunteers are working on collect the funds for producing those. Ukraine, I would say, is #1 country in the world capable to shut down those small air vehicles like Shaheds or Giran drones, it doesn't really matter. Europe and NATO in general, they do not have this mechanism of how to shut down enemy drones very cheap. They will use Patriot missiles. Each missile is several $million. They will also fire the similar expensive missiles from F-35s just to kaput the drone, the price of which is $10,000 maximum. Here we speak about Giran drone. Well, Shahed is a little bit more expensive, maybe around 20,000–25,000. As we know, Russia produces the analog of the Shahed drone, Giran, fully now on territory of Russia. And just imagine if they fire 800 of the drones to Europe, like they do against Ukraine sometimes. 800 drones to Poland, to Baltic countries, that would create complete chaos. Absolutely. And the drones were already flying. They constantly flying in Belgium airspace, in Norway, Germany, over military bases. And it seems like everyone just got used to it. Russia violated Estonian airspace for 12 minutes long. Estonia is a tiny little country, and they've flown 12 minutes in its airspace. 3 or 2 fighter jets, MiG-31. And Rutte said, "Oh, those are ancient airplanes, MiGs." Huh. He was laughing about it, but actually it's the fastest flying air vehicle still exists, yeah? Yeah, the fastest was the Blackbird, R-71, yeah, as far as I remember. But MiG-31, from all of the still flying aircraft, it's the fastest. Moreover, it is used as a platform to launch the hypersonic missiles. And can Europe handle it? Rutte stated that those aircraft, they didn't possess any threat. All right, so we'll see. And based on intelligence reports from European allies, it's almost imminent that there will be some sort of the conflict provocation at least against, I guess, Baltic countries, maybe even in Suwalki corridor. Some experts say that against Estonia in one or other way. Ukrainian experts also say about it. President Zelensky says about it. Some of the officials of Europe, politicians, as I said to you, intelligence services. So I do not exclude even that variant. I've told you about this humanitarian corridor already towards Kaliningrad Oblast, how Russia may go there and start immediately to blackmail Europe and NATO if they try to attack Russian forces, for example, or Kaliningrad. Russians might just say, okay, in this case, we're going to use some tactical nuke against your bases or against your cities, for example, Warsaw. And do you think that European politicians will act against Russia if Russia wouldn't penetrate, for example, towards the Polish territory and just proceed through Lithuania? Are people in Portugal, Spain, Italy ready to protect Lithuania? And people sometimes they say about the Article 5 that it obligates to do something. No. If you really believe that there is the obligation, you need to open the official Article 5 where you find that countries members of NATO, they may or may not help to other members of NATO, may or may not. So for me it smells like Budapest Memorandum. Without political determinants to protect NATO, to protect Western values, NATO doesn't exist. And sadly, with what is happening in the United States, with this attitude towards Europe, it's already gone. I mean, NATO should be reformed to some sort of the European army. But unfortunately, it's not easy to construct this army, again, because there is no unity in Europe. Maybe some of them separate countries might do it, yeah, to create the common army. Also, Europe has issues with logistics, and I should film separate video about it, that it's physically impossible, for example, to send huge number of the forces to protect the Baltic states or even Poland, even from France and Germany. If the war starts on territory of NATO, there will be still some of the barricades built even by European bureaucracy to move those forces. It was uncovered during the military drills. It is out there in official reports that not just the physical infrastructure is outdated, but also the obstacles are permissions, approvals, those civilian institutions. You may say that with the start of the war they will not function, but no, they will function, unfortunately. And Europe should came out with scenario of how to nail them down, how to get rid of those bureaucratic things in case of the confrontation with Russia on territory of the Eastern Europe, Eastern NATO Europe, let's say, because the war is happening in Europe here, but not on territory of NATO. I would say in general reaction of Europe is kind of weak still, and still they continue to purchase Russian fossil fuels. They spend more money for that than they spend for helping Ukrainian military. It is not good. Well, they plan to stop purchasing Russian fossil fuels by 2027, but it also means that the whole next year Europe will finance Russian war machine, and they will finance it more than helping Ukraine once again. Well, guys, I hope that I'm wrong, but I think it's inevitable for this war to escalate, and Russia may have even some of the resources because they may trap Baltic countries, for example. They might go to Baltic Sea and, as I say to you, cut Suwalki corridor, and they might tell to Europe, you cancel the entire support of Ukraine and we're gonna unblock Baltics. That's it. That's the blackmail. And for that, Russia doesn't need like huge resources. 100,000 soldiers is pretty much enough for Suwalki corridor. And the rest will be done by Russian Navy fleet in Baltics. It's out there presented. Also, Kaliningrad region is quite armed. They have even Iskanders. In this blackmail, Putin may also play Belarus card. For example, they might say that it's Lukashenko who will target you, some of the European country, if NATO forces start the counteroffensive operation towards Kaliningrad, or they'll try to cut the Suwalki corridor, Russian supplies towards Kaliningrad. So Lukashenko might be this villain, not Russia, not Putin, but Lukashenko already has his nuclear weapons. Iskanders, ballistic missiles, are equipped with those warheads, as well as Oreshnik. So Lukashenko might be this guy, crazy dictator. He has mustaches, you know. So I see this variant to come maybe even next year, maybe in 2027, we'll see. But sooner than in 2030. That year, Germany promises for European forces or European armies to be more or less ready for the escalation. But we understand that Putin has smaller window by the time Donald Trump is a president. But the positive sign is that Europe finally, little by little, but understands that Ukraine is the main shield of Europe, that it's better to support Ukraine and force Russian army to stop on Ukrainian territory than to fight on NATO territory. So Chancellor Merz is the great supporter of this idea, and even with those Trojan horses as Slovakia and Hungary in the European Union, still there is the general understanding that they need to support Ukraine, and those are the great news. So I'm sure that Europe doesn't have another variant rather than to support Ukraine, which is good. Europe is alone. You see, it's been pressed by United States, it's been pressed by Russia, China. I'm sure that it also doesn't like European Union to be that strong alliance. The fact that Europe needs Ukraine and Ukraine needs Europe. That's why Ukraine, after all, should be the part of this European family, from what I see. And about the global confrontation, just these days before the new year, there is the escalation happening around Taiwan. China started its biggest military drills of blockade of the island. And maybe they're also looking through this window that Donald Trump gives them, you know, with this poor reaction or appeasing the aggressor. They'll look at everything of the attitude of the United States towards Russia, towards Putin, We are entering the age of force. That is what it was before the Second World War, where all of the territorial disputes were resolved with the help of the military force. And that's not okay, and that is not safe for us. But what can we do? We just need to follow updates and see where the wind blows and how it's gonna evolve pretty much soon, I guess, in Taiwan, and not just in Taiwan. As Mark Rutte predicts, maybe Russia may act together with China simultaneously in this escalation to deflect the forces of NATO in Europe and in Taiwan, for NATO just to be overwhelmed with its possible response. America, you see, it's busy with some of the attacks on boats or Venezuela escalation, the real threats. Unfortunately, White House doesn't understand. But let's be positive, my friends, because in the recent history, no dictators achieved the final result of the victory. Yeah, they won several of the battles, but the wars were always won by coalition of democratic forces. Like now it's the Western countries, yeah, we have division, we don't have unity. So it seems like those dictators in Russia, in China, North Korea, Iran, and elsewhere, they want to make us united once again, right? Those dictators really want to feel this punch of democracy as it was before. Yeah, they'll feel it 100%. Well, guys, those were not all of the events that I actually wanted to discuss that happened for the last year, but I don't want this video to be crazy long, so I need to go to celebrate with my family. New year, new barrier, and something unknown will happen the next year, the year after. We'll see. And I'm very happy that I'm with you here on this journey for already many of the years. Thanks for your subscriptions, for your likes, for your comments, and most of all for your time, because it's the precious resource that you spent watching my videos. I respect that a lot. Thank you guys so much for your kind attention, your support elsewhere on all of the platforms, Patreon membership, Spotify, and today on my other channel and also on Twitch and on Kick simultaneously. I'm gonna go on stream after celebrating the new year. Maybe for several hours, I'm gonna say I just want to communicate with you directly. So see you around, and cheers, guys. Stay awesome. Happy New Year.